She publicly mocked my cheap $80,000 dress, calling me classless in front of her boss. She didn't realize she was talking to the secret founder of her company and her boss's boss. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. The air in the small chapel was thick with the scent of lilies and the heavy, quiet weight of grief. My sister Sarah was gone. I sat in the front pew, a silent figure in a sea of my family's more theatrical sorrow. My son Mark sat beside me, his hand on my back in a gesture of distracted comfort. Beside him sat my daughter-in-law, Chloe. She was, as always, a vision. She wore a dramatic, wide-brimmed black hat and a designer dress with a gold-buckled belt that was, in my opinion, too flashy for a funeral. She dabbed at her perfectly dry, beautiful eyes with a silk handkerchief, her expression one of deep, performative solemnity. I, Eliza Monroe, was dressed in a simple, unadorned, boat-necked black dress of a heavy matte crepe. It was a dress of absolute, almost monastic simplicity. To my daughter-in-law's trained, fashion-obsessed eye, I knew it was an object of profound and deeply embarrassing simplicity. It was cheap. It was plain. It was, in her world, a failure. I felt her gaze on me, a quick, critical flicker of assessment, and I saw the almost imperceptible curl of her lip. I had once again failed to live up to the glamorous, high-fashion standards she had set for our family. She was a brand manager for Aurelia, one of the most exclusive and revered luxury fashion houses in the world. And I, her mother-in-law, had shown up to my own sister's funeral looking, in her eyes, like a retired schoolteacher, which, of course, was a fiction she knew nothing about. My grief for Sarah was a cold, private stone in the pit of my stomach. As the pastor's eulogy washed over me, I found my mind drifting to my son's wife and to the quiet, ticking time bomb her presence had become. Her condescension, her constant, subtle digs at my simple taste, her obsession with the flashy, logo-driven world of fashion. It had all been a low, annoying hum in the background of my quiet, retired life. Lately, the hum had been growing louder. During the eulogy, her phone buzzed. I saw her glance down, her thumb scrolling. A small, satisfied smile touched her lips before she composed her face back into its mask of sorrow. The vibration, the tiny flash of light, felt like a spike driven into the sacred silence. The reception was at my home, a spacious uptown apartment with high ceilings and a view of the park. The space, like my dress, is a testament to my personal philosophy: quiet, understated luxury. The art on the walls is a curated selection of works by brilliant, but not yet famous artists I've been collecting for 40 years. There is not a single visible brand name in the entire apartment. It is a space that whispers its value, not shouts it. Chloe, of course, did not appreciate the whisper. She moved through my home with the air of a disappointed real estate agent, her eyes scanning the clean lines with insulting pity. "Eliza, your home has such potential," she said, her voice a low murmur as she cornered me by the fireplace. A small group of my cousins was within earshot. With the right designer, we could really elevate this space. This minimalist thing is so dated. She was, in her own way, trying to be helpful. She was offering to save me from my own bad taste. "I like it," I said, my voice quiet. "It's peaceful." "Oh, of course," she said, with a small, tinkling laugh, designed to include the nearby guests in her gentle mockery. "But a home should be an expression of one's success, don't you think? A showcase. Your son is one of the most brilliant pediatric surgeons in the city. You, his mother, should live in a space that reflects that." The implication was clear. My home, like my dress, was a source of public shame for her. Later, I saw her standing with Mark, her hand on his arm, her voice an urgent whisper. "Mark, you have to talk to her," she was saying, That dress today was just mortifying. My boss was there. What is he supposed to think? That your family is poor? I flinched. Her boss? Julian Vance, the CEO, had come to pay his respects. He was, I knew, the only other person in this room who knew the truth. She's from a different generation, Chloe. Mark sighed, his shoulders slumping with familiar, weary resignation. It's not important. It is important, she insisted, her voice sharp. We are a brand, Mark, the Monroe family, and she is damaging the brand. She's a liability. I turned away, my heart a cold ache. She was not just my daughter-in-law. She was a hostile corporate entity, and I was a poorly performing asset. She called me a liability, and my grief turned to ice. She had no idea what she had just started. That evening, after the last of the mourners had departed, Mark stayed behind to help me clean. It was a gesture of his innate, gentle kindness. We worked in a comfortable, familiar silence for a while, clearing plates. Finally, he broke the quiet, his voice hesitant. Mom, he began, not looking at me. You know, Chloe, she just wants what's best for us, for the family. Best for the family, I repeated, my back to him, or best for her brand. Her work, it's all about image, he tried to explain, fumbling. She's just trying to protect that. Protect it from what, Mark? I asked quietly, stacking plates in the dishwasher. From me? No, of course not, he said too quickly. He came and stood beside me, leaning against the counter. She admires people who have a certain flair, a certain presence. Like her boss. Her boss? I asked, my voice a neutral instrument. Yeah, he said, his face lighting up with a genuine, uncomplicated admiration. This Elias Lauren guy, the founder of Aurelia. You've never seen her talk about anyone the way she talks about him. He's a complete recluse. Apparently no one has ever even seen a picture of him, but his vision. She says he's a genius, that he single-handedly redefined modern luxury. He's her hero. I just nodded, a small, sad smile on my face. He sounds like a very impressive man, I said. He is, Mark said. And that's the world Chloe wants us to be a part of, Mom. The world of Aurelia, a world of taste, of quality, of perfection. And she just wants her whole family to reflect that. That's all. He was defending her, translating her cruel materialistic snobbery into a more palatable language of ambition. In his desire to be a good husband, he had become blind to the deep and constant disrespect she showed me. I know you think she's being superficial, he said, his voice pleading. But she really does admire you, Mom. She has a different way of showing it. I looked at my son, at his kind, handsome, and deeply naive face, and my heart ached for the conversation we could never have. The one where I would tell him that Elias Lauren, the reclusive European male genius his wife so worshipped, was in fact his own quiet, unassuming, and apparently classless mother. The story of Elias Lauren was born in 1983, in a cramped downtown apartment over a rickety sewing machine. I was 25, a recent and broke graduate of Parsons, and I had an idea. A quiet rebellion against the loud, flashy world of high fashion. I believed in a luxury of simplicity, of perfect fabrics, of clothes that did not shout, but whispered. I created a small collection of 7 perfectly crafted pieces. A simple black dress, a perfectly cut pair of trousers, a cashmere coat with no visible buttons. I took my collection to the buyers. They loved the clothes. They hated the story. Who are you? One of them asked, bored. A young black girl from the neighborhood. That's not a luxury brand, honey. That's a social interest story. It doesn't sell. They told me the world of high fashion needed a myth, a European pedigree, a name that sounded like old money. So I invented one. I took my own name, Eliza, and made it European, Elias. I took my mother's maiden name, Lamont, and added a sophisticated, aristocratic Lauren. I became Elias Lauren, a mysterious, reclusive European designer. I said he worked from a private, unlisted studio in Europe, that he refused to be photographed, that he believed the clothes, not the designer, should be the star. And it worked. The world fell in love with the myth. Aurelia was born. For 40 years, I lived a double life. By day, I was Eliza Monroe, single mother. By night, I was Elias Lauren, the silent, invisible architect of a global luxury brand. I hired a brilliant young business student, Julian Vance, to be the public corporate face, the CEO. He was the only person in the world, other than my lawyer, who knew my secret. I kept my secret for 2 reasons. First, for the brand. The myth of Elias Lauren was too powerful, too profitable to dismantle. And second, for my son. I did not want to raise Mark in that toxic, shallow world. I wanted to give him a normal life. And in that, I had succeeded. But in protecting him from my world, I had left him completely unprepared for the woman he had chosen to bring into it. My private line rang, the one in my study that only Julian used. I looked at the caller ID, and my blood ran cold. He never called this late. I picked it up. Julian? Eliza. His voice was its usual smooth baritone, but tight. I am so sorry to hear about Sarah. My deepest condolences. Thank you, Julian. I'm not just calling to offer condolences, I'm afraid, he continued. I'm calling because we have a situation. A Chloe-related situation. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. I had, in a moment of maternal weakness, and against my better judgment, pulled a single string to get Chloe her first job at the company 3 years ago. I had made it clear to Julian that she was to be given no special treatment. I had hoped the discipline of the Aurelia culture would be good for her. It seemed I had been wrong. What has she done now? I asked, sinking into my study chair. It's not what she's done, Eliza. It's what she's doing, he explained, his voice tight with frustration. Her performance reviews are abysmal. She's arrogant with the junior staff, sycophantic with senior leadership, and her actual work is lazy. She spends most of her day managing her own social media. Frankly, she is a negative influence on her entire department. He paused, and I heard him take a deep breath. I've been protecting her, he admitted, his voice low. For you, for Mark. I've been bearing her negative reviews, massaging her performance metrics, but I can't do it anymore. Her department head is demanding her termination. And honestly, he's right. Then his voice dropped even lower. But that's not the worst of it, Eliza. She's been telling everyone that she is the personal protege of Elias Lauren. The room went silent. I could hear the blood roaring in my ears. She has been dropping your name, his name, in meetings, Julian continued, the anger clear now, hinting that she has a direct secret line to the founder. She is using your myth to build her own power base within the company, and people are starting to believe her. I was speechless. She was not just a bad employee. She was a fraud, using the secret of my life's work as her own personal ladder. Worse, Julian said. She's a security risk. She's careless. This afternoon, I received a file from IT. A file? She's been forwarding confidential design briefs to her personal email, and this morning, she posted a photo on her public Instagram. It was a close-up of a fabric swatch from the new fall collection. The post was deleted in 10 minutes, but not before 2 major fashion blogs got a screenshot. She's leaking, Eliza. Whether from stupidity or malice, it doesn't matter. Liability, I whispered, the word tasting like ash. The very word she had used for me. Exactly, Julian said. She is a liability to the brand. Eliza, I need you to tell me what you want me to do. I have been holding off on her termination out of respect for you, but my primary loyalty is to this company, to what we built. You just have to give me the green light. The termination letter, I knew, was already drafted. It was sitting in a file on his computer, a loaded gun waiting for me to give the order. Eliza? I looked at a photo on my desk. Mark, as a boy, smiling and his arm around me. Julian. What would this do to Mark? My voice was smaller than I wanted. There was a pause. That is your world, Eliza, he said, not unkindly. My world is the brand. She is actively harming it. I need an answer. I closed my eyes. Hold, I said. Don't fire her. Not yet. I need to be sure. I need to see it for myself. Eliza, I don't think... Hold, I repeated, my voice firm now. One more chance. But Julian, document everything. Every leak, every lie. Build the file. I have a feeling I'm going to need it. I hung up, my hand shaking. And then I heard my own doorbell ring. A series of sharp, insistent jabs. I opened the door, and my heart sank. It was Mark and Chloe, and she was holding a ridiculously expensive bottle of champagne. Eliza, she trilled, sweeping past me into the living room. We're celebrating. Mark followed, a weak, hopeful smile on his face. The pop of the cork echoed like a gunshot in my quiet apartment. And what are we celebrating, dear? I asked, my voice calm, a counterpoint to her brittle energy. My promotion, she declared, her eyes shining with a triumphant, avaricious light. Julian Vance is creating a new position, Vice President of North American Branding. And it's mine. It's practically a sure thing. I kept my face perfectly still. Julian had just told me her department had wanted her fired. This promotion was a complete and utter fiction. There's just one final step, she said, with a grand theatrical flourish. She laid out her plan. It was not a request. It was an ultimatum. The final decision comes down to Julian and the board, of course, she explained, her voice a low conspiratorial purr. And I need to seal the deal. I need to show them that I have the right connections, the right foundation. She took a sip of champagne. So I have told Julian that my mother-in-law, the widow of the great Dr. Mark Monroe Sr., would be honored to host a small, intimate dinner for him and a few key board members at her beautiful historic apartment this Saturday. She looked at me, her smile a dazzling, threatening thing. It's just a small, simple dinner, she continued, her voice a sweet, poisonous melody. You won't have to do a thing. I will handle the caterers, the flowers. I just need you and your apartment as a prop, a beautiful, elegant, and deeply respectable backdrop for my final interview. She wasn't just asking to use my home. She was asking to use me, my name, my late husband's reputation. She wanted to wear it all like a costume to hide her own shallow, grasping ambition. She pulled out her phone and shoved it in my face. Look, I already sent the Evite. I put your address. They're all expecting it. My blood ran cold. She hadn't just told Julian. She had invited him here. She was forcing my hand, creating a situation so public I couldn't refuse without making her look bad to him. She was leveraging my love for my son against me. It would mean a lot to her, Mom, Mark said, his voice pleading. It would be a huge help to her career. I looked at her bright, triumphant, and deeply clueless face. She had no idea that her promotion was a lie. She had no idea that her career at Aurelia was on the verge of catastrophic extinction. She was walking into a trap of her own making, and she was asking me, the master of the hunt, to help her set it. The irony was so profound, so deeply, darkly satisfying, that it was all I could do not to laugh. Of course, darling, I said, my voice a masterpiece of warm, maternal, and deeply fraudulent support. I would be honored. I would be honored to host a dinner for your boss. Anything for my family. The night of the dinner party arrived. I had, as promised, allowed Chloe to take over my home. She had been here all day, a whirlwind of frantic energy, directing a small army of caterers and florists. She had, in her words, elevated my space. This meant she had filled my quiet, minimalist apartment with massive, ostentatious arrangements of white orchids and hired a string quartet to play softly in the corner. The effect was not elegant. It was the lobby of a new and very expensive Dubai hotel. A florist, a young man trembling under her scrutiny, accidentally knocked over a small vase. It shattered on the floor. "You idiot!" Chloe shrieked, her face contorting. "You're ruining everything. Get out!" The young man, pale, nearly in tears, fled. Chloe simply snapped her fingers at another caterer. "Clean that up." I watched from the hallway and retreated to my bedroom, a quiet, amused observer of the chaos she was creating in her own name. The dinner was not, as she had claimed, a small, intimate affair. There were 20 guests, a curated collection of fashion journalists, influential bloggers, and a few junior executives from Aurelia, all of whom were there to witness Chloe's final triumphant ascent. And of course, the guest of honor, her boss, Julian Vance. I dressed for the evening with quiet, deliberate care. I did not choose one of my more formal gowns. I chose instead the same simple, unadorned, boat-necked black dress I had worn to my sister's funeral just a week before. The cheap dress. It was a quiet, subtle, and deeply personal act of defiance. A final, silent test. I made my entrance as the party was in full swing. Julian, ever the loyal co-conspirator, saw me first. He excused himself from a conversation and greeted me with a warm, respectful kiss on the cheek. His eyes, for a fraction of a second, met mine. In them, I saw a flicker of shared, grim amusement. He knew exactly what I was doing. Chloe, holding court in the center of the room, saw me. I watched the look on her face. A flicker of pure, unadulterated horror, followed by a wave of deep, public embarrassment. I had done it again. She excused herself from her circle of admirers and glided over to me, her smile a tight, brittle, furious thing. "Eliza," she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "What are you wearing?" "Good evening, Chloe. Your party looks elaborate." "That is the same simple dress you wore to the funeral," she seethed, her eyes darting around to see if anyone was listening. "This is a celebration. My celebration. You look classless." She didn't know that 3 other women in the room, 3 of the most powerful and influential fashion editors in the city, women who knew me as Eliza, but suspected the truth of Elias, were at that very moment looking at my dress with a kind of quiet, reverent awe. They were the true connoisseurs. They recognized the flawless architectural cut. They recognized the rare, matte, deep space, black of the proprietary crepe fabric. They recognized the unmistakable, mythical signature of an early archival piece by the great reclusive master, Elias Lauren. They knew they were in the presence of greatness, and they were watching, with fascinated, professional interest, as his own deeply ignorant brand manager was in the process of committing a catastrophic, career-ending act of sacrilege. They knew they were in the presence of greatness, and they were watching as Chloe, oblivious, prepared to commit career suicide, and then Chloe, in a final, glorious, and deeply self-destructive act of hubris, turned to a small group of her own junior colleagues who had just approached. In a voice just loud enough for them and for me to hear, she delivered the line that would be the epitaph of her own short, unimpressive career. "You see," she said with a sigh of pure, theatrical, condescending martyrdom. "This is what I have to deal with." My mother-in-law, bless her heart, is a sweet woman, but utterly classless. The social grenade had been thrown. The pin was pulled. The small cluster of Chloe's junior colleagues, 3 ambitious 20-somethings in trendy, fast fashion outfits, just stood there, their faces a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and a dawning, delicious office gossip horror. Mark, standing nearby, overheard. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than weak compliance in his eyes, a flash of genuine protective anger. "Chloe," he said, his voice a low warning growl. "That's enough." But Chloe was too high on her own sense of power, too close to what she believed was her final victory. She gave him a dismissive wave. "Oh, hush, Mark. I'm just being honest." The real repercussion, the one that mattered, was happening silently on the other side of the room. Julian Thorne, who had been in a quiet, intense conversation with a fashion editor from Vogue, stopped talking. I knew he had heard it. He didn't turn. He didn't react. But I saw his back, in its impeccably tailored $1,000 suit, go rigid. The fashion editor, a woman who had known me for 20 years and who was one of the few people in the world who knew my secret, also heard it. She looked from Chloe to me, and her eyes, usually a mask of cool appraisal, widened with a look of pure, unadulterated professional glee. This was not just gossip. This was a cover story. I, however, remained a perfect still pool of calm. I did not get angry. I did not get defensive. I simply gave Chloe a small, sad, and deeply pitying smile. The smile of a queen for a court jester who has just made a fatal, unfunny joke. "If you'll excuse me," I said, my voice quiet and utterly unshakable, "I believe I need to check on the canapes." And with that, I turned and walked away. I did not go to the kitchen. I walked past the shocked circle, past my stunned son, and directly to the Vogue editor. "Anna," I said, touching her arm. She turned, her eyes bright. "Eliza," she breathed, taking in my dress. Is that?" "It is," I said quietly. "A night of surprising revelations, don't you think?" I gave her a small smile and walked away, leaving Chloe standing alone in a suddenly very awkward, very silent, and very judgmental little circle. I went to my study. I slipped into my sanctuary, closing the heavy oak door, shutting out the noise and the lies. A minute later, there was a soft knock. It was Julian. He closed the door, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. "I am so sorry, Eliza," he began, his voice a low growl. "The disrespect, the sheer breathtaking arrogance. I should have fired her months ago." "It is not your fault, Julian," I said. "I was the one who asked you to be patient." "Well," he said, his voice dry, "I believe we can now officially declare that experiment a failure." He walked to the window. "The liability we discussed. It has now become untenable." "I agree," I said. "Her behavior tonight was not just a personal insult. It was a professional one. In front of Anna Wintour's right-hand woman, no less. She has demonstrated a profound lack of the one quality our brand is built on: discernment. She cannot tell the difference between a piece of priceless art and a cheap knockoff." He looked at me, his eyes full of a quiet, satisfying loyalty. "The contingency plan. It is still in place. The letter is in my briefcase. Signed and dated. The termination letter. A beautiful, simple, and utterly ruthless document. It was a simple corporate statement about a strategic restructuring and the elimination of her position. Clean, impersonal, a perfect, heavily branded execution." "Then I believe," I said, my voice a quiet final whisper, "that it is time for you to action that plan in the morning." Julian nodded, a single decisive acknowledgement. "I understand." He turned to leave, but at the door he paused. "Eliza," he said, his voice softer. "The dress. It is magnificent." The next day was a Sunday, and as was our tradition, Mark and Chloe came to my apartment for brunch. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Chloe was in a foul mood, her usual bright chatter replaced by a sullen, resentful silence. She clearly blamed me for the awkward, abrupt ending of her perfect dinner party. Mark was a nervous wreck, failing to bridge the icy chasm that had opened between his wife and his mother. I had prepared all their favorites: fresh squeezed orange juice, homemade brioche French toast. Chloe just picked at her food, her expression one of profound, insulting boredom. I decided it was time to begin the final, beautiful act. "You know, Chloe," I began, my voice casual, "I was thinking about our conversation last night, about my dress. You seemed so interested in it." She looked up, a flicker of surprised, guilty alarm in her eyes. "Oh," she said with a small, dismissive laugh, "it was just very simple, that's all." "It is simple," I agreed, my voice a warm, gentle purr. That was always the philosophy of the designer, a belief in a kind of radical simplicity, in the power of a perfect line. I was, of course, quoting from the Aurelia Brand Bible, a document I had written myself 20 years ago, a document she, as brand manager, was supposed to have memorized. She just gave me a blank, confused look. "It's an Aurelia piece, you know," I continued, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. "A one-of-a-kind from the archival collection. It has a name. It's called the Midnight Dress." The effect of that name was profound. Her fork, halfway to her mouth, clattered onto her plate. Her face, a mask of sullen boredom, was now a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. The Midnight Dress. Even a fashion amateur like my son knew the name. It was a legend, a myth in the world of Aurelia. It was the first dress the reclusive, mythical founder, Elias Lauren, had ever designed. It was said to have been made for his own mother, and that only one had ever been produced. Its whereabouts were a complete mystery. It was the holy grail for any true Aurelia aficionado, and I had just claimed to have been wearing it at my sister's funeral. The cheap, classless, embarrassing dress. Kimberly stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, her mind struggling to process the ludicrous statement. The look on her face was a beautiful mixture of disbelief, a dawning, horrified suspicion, and the brand manager's instinct to call out a fraud. "The Midnight Dress?" she said, her voice a small, sharp, skeptical laugh. "Eliza, that's a lovely story, but that's all it is, a story, a brand myth. Most fashion historians don't even think it really exists." She was regaining her composure, her arrogance. "And besides," she continued, her voice a full-blown, pitying lecture, "Aurelia doesn't make simple, unadorned dresses like that anymore. The brand has evolved, and even if they did, with all due respect, you couldn't afford it." The final, casual, miscalculated assertion of my inferiority. It was the cue for my checkmate. I gave her a small, sad, pitying smile, the very same smile she had given me so many times. "Oh, but it does exist, my dear," I said, my voice gentle and unshakable. "And you are right. It is prohibitively expensive." I paused, savoring the moment. I looked at Mark, who was watching this exchange with baffled confusion. "I had it appraised for insurance purposes a few years ago," I continued, my voice a soft, musing whisper. "The archival value, the rarity, the story. The appraiser said it was almost impossible to put a price on, but for the sake of the policy, they had to." I took another slow sip of my coffee, my eyes never leaving her shocked, pale face. I believe the final insured valuation was $80,000. The number was a sonic boom that shattered the quiet Sunday morning peace. Mark literally choked on his orange juice. $80,000. But it was Chloe's reaction that was the masterpiece. The color drained from her face. The number was shocking, yes, but it was not the number that had terrified her. It was the name, the midnight dress. A dress that, according to the sacred lore of the Aurelia brand, could only be in the possession of one person in the entire world, the founder himself, or a member of his immediate and very private family. Her sharp, logical brain was suddenly faced with a terrible, impossible, and deeply, deeply frightening equation. And the only possible solution was a truth so monstrous, so world-shattering, that her mind refused to compute it. And in that moment of her profound, satisfying chaos, her phone began to buzz. The phone didn't just vibrate. It was a loud, insistent, jarring buzz on the heavy oak table, the kind reserved for an urgent, deeply important call. She looked at the screen. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. The caller ID was stark. Julian Vance, CEO. A new, cold, and very different kind of dread appeared in her eyes. The brand manager, so confident in her promotion just 2 days ago, was now being summoned by the king. On a Sunday morning. I have to take this, she stammered, her voice a shaky, uncertain thing. Of course, dear, I said, my voice a soothing, gentle purr. It must be important. She fumbled for the phone, her chair scraping loudly as she stood. She walked with a new, unsteady gait into the other room. She closed the door behind her. Mark looked at me, his face a mask of pure, uncomprehending confusion. Mom, what is going on? He asked, his voice a low, worried whisper. What was all that about the dress? $80,000? And why is Chloe acting so strange? I just looked at my son. His quiet, comfortable world was about to be turned irrevocably upside down. Chloe was gone for a long time. The sound of her voice from the other room was a low, muffled murmur, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the frantic, rising and falling cadence of a person who is both pleading and arguing. Something was very, very wrong. Mark was becoming increasingly agitated. He pushed his plate away, his appetite gone. I should go check on her, he said, making a move to stand up. Let her be, Mark, I said, my voice a quiet, firm command that stopped him in his tracks. I believe your wife is having a professional conversation. It would be rude to interrupt. He sank back into his chair, a look of profound, resentful confusion on his face. He was a bystander to a drama he did not understand. Finally, the door to the other room opened. Chloe returned. She was a different woman. The arrogant, confident brand manager was gone. The woman who stood in the doorway was a ghost. Her face was as pale as chalk. Her eyes were wide with a look of pure, hollowed-out shock. Her body was trembling with a fine, uncontrollable shudder. She did not look at me. She stared at her husband, her eyes full of a new, terrifying vulnerability. Chloe? Mark whispered, rising. Honey, what is it? What's wrong? What did Julian say? I have to go to the office, she stammered, her voice a thin, reedy thing he had never heard before. Now, there's an emergency, an HR meeting. An HR meeting, on a Sunday. In the world of corporate power, those 3 words, spoken in that tone, could only mean one thing. An HR meeting? Mark repeated, his confusion laced with a dawning alarm. On a Sunday? What's going on? I don't know, she lied, her eyes darting away from his, unable to meet his gaze. But I have to go. Now. She turned and practically fled, grabbing her purse from the entryway, her movements clumsy. A moment later, we heard the front door of my apartment open, and then slam shut with a loud, violent, and deeply final bang. She was gone. Mark and I were left alone in the silent, sunlit dining room. He looked at me, his face a mess of 1,000 questions. Mom, he began, his voice a low, pleading thing. You have to tell me what is going on. This, this is not normal. That dress, Chloe, Julian Vance. It's all connected somehow, isn't it? I looked at my son, my kind, good, and deeply oblivious son. The time for secrets was over. I took a deep breath, the secret of 40 years heavy on my tongue. Yes, Mark. It is time we had a very honest conversation. The Aurelia headquarters in Soho was a temple of minimalist, intimidating luxury. The lobby was a vast, white, echoing space with a single brutalist concrete desk that looked like an altar. Chloe, who had once strode through the space with the proprietary air of a high priestess, now walked across the polished floor with the hesitant, shuffling steps of a heretic on her way to an inquisition. The emergency HR meeting was a lie. This was not a meeting. It was an execution. She was shown directly to the top floor, to the vast corner office of the CEO. Julian Vance was not sitting behind his massive black lacquer desk. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the panoramic view of the city, his back to the door. "Chloe," he said, his voice a calm, quiet, and utterly chilling thing. He did not turn around. "Thank you for coming in. Please close the door." She did as she was told. The soft click of the latch was a sound of absolute, terrifying finality. "There has been a change in the company's strategic direction," he began, his voice a dispassionate monotone. "We are restructuring the North American branding division. I'm afraid your position as brand manager has been deemed redundant." The corporate euphemisms were a cruel, surgical kindness. He was not firing her for her incompetence or her arrogance or for the fact that she was a toxic presence. He was simply eliminating her position. He finally turned from the window. His face was a mask of cool professional neutrality. He walked to his desk and picked up a single, thick, cream-colored envelope. He slid it across the polished black surface. "This is your severance package," he said. "It is, I believe you will find, extremely generous. It is, of course, contingent upon your signature on a comprehensive, lifetime, non-disclosure agreement." She just stared at the envelope, her mind a numb, buzzing void. This was not happening. The promotion, the VP position, it had all been a fantasy. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice raw. "I thought, the promotion." "There is no promotion, Chloe," Julian said. For the first time, a flicker of cold, personal anger showed through his mask. There was never going to be a promotion. There was only ever going to be this, your termination. He leaned forward, his hands braced on the desk. "You are a talented woman, Chloe. You are smart. You are ambitious. But you lack the one single essential quality that this brand is built upon. You lack discernment. You lack taste. And you have a fatal, deeply unprofessional habit of making enemies of the wrong people." Her audience was over. She stood in the center of that vast, silent office, the termination letter a cold, heavy weight in her hand, her world in a chaotic spiral. Enemies of the wrong people. What did that mean? Her mind kept circling back to the dress, the midnight dress, the $80,000 dress, the impossible mythical dress her classless mother-in-law claimed to own. It was all connected. But the logic, the terrible world-shattering equation, was still just beyond her grasp. And then Julian Vance, with a final, quiet, devastating flourish, decided to solve the equation for her. "There is one more thing," he said, his voice once again the calm CEO. He pushed another, thinner document across the desk. "The non-disclosure agreement. It is a standard Aurelia document, but with one very specific, non-negotiable addendum." She looked at the document. She saw the key phrase, highlighted in bold, the identity of the founder, Mr. Elias Lauren. "The founder?" Julian continued, his voice a low, conversational thing. values his privacy above all else. His anonymity is the cornerstone of the brand's mystique. You have, I am told, been overly familiar with his name in recent months. This document is to ensure your departure does not result in any unfortunate leaks. He paused, letting the threat sink in. As I am sure you can appreciate, he said, a slow, cold smile finally touching his lips. He would be most displeased if his private family life were to become a matter of public speculation. And as you have so recently, and so publicly, demonstrated, you have a rather unfortunate habit of speaking ill of his family. He delivered the final, world-ending blow. He looked her directly in the eye, his gaze full of a quiet, triumphant, personal satisfaction. Because, as I'm sure you now realize, Chloe, he said, his voice a soft, final, devastating whisper, so does Eliza Monroe. The names, her name, spoken in the same breath as the myth, the legend, the god she had worshipped, the final, terrible, impossible piece of the puzzle slammed into place. Elias Lauren, Eliza Monroe, Elias, Eliza. Her mind, her entire arrogant and deeply ignorant world, simply shattered. The reclusive European male genius she had built her career around was a fiction. And the reality, the quiet, unassuming, and deeply powerful architect of her entire universe, was the very same woman she had, just the night before, in an act of supreme and ironic hubris, called classless. The silence in the office was absolute. She was not just fired. She had been rendered a fool, a punchline in a cosmic, humiliating joke of her own making. The woman she had mocked, the woman she had pitied, the woman she had tried to elevate. That woman was her god. She had spent the past 3 years lecturing the sun on the proper way to shine. She finally, shakily, sank into the chair opposite his desk. The fight was gone. All that was left was the hollow, echoing ruin. Julian watched her, his expression no longer one of anger, but of a quiet, sorrowful finality. She gave you every chance, Chloe, he said softly. She saw your ambition. She wanted you to succeed, but you just couldn't see her. You were so blinded by the labels, by the superficial, glittering surface, that you couldn't see the genius sitting right in front of you at your own family dinner table. He stood up, signaling that the meeting and her career was over. Sign the papers. Take your generous severance and disappear. It is the kindest exit strategy she could have possibly offered you. The final scene took place not in the gleaming world of Aurelia, but in the warm, quiet world of my own home. Mark was sitting in the armchair opposite me. His face was a pale, stunned mask. I had just, after 40 years of silence, told him the truth. All of it. He looked from me, his quiet mother, to the simple black dress that was now draped carefully over a nearby chair. A silent, powerful testament to a life he had never known. His wife had worshipped a myth. His mother was the myth. Their marriage, I knew, was a fragile, hollow thing. I had just handed him the hammer that would likely shatter it. But that was his story now, his choice. I was at peace. I sat in my quiet, elegant study, the one Chloe had deemed to have so much potential. I picked up a charcoal pencil. I began to sketch a new design on a fresh sheet of paper. The simple black dress, my own personal standard, was a silent, powerful testament to the one single, most important truth of my brand and of my life. True class and true power never ever need to raise their voice. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.